Our frustration from the Flow end is we broadcast across multiple states, and our concern was exactly what has been materialising, is that states only seem focused on, like the South Australian case, on looking after their own produce, and that's understandable. Geographically, that's all that matters. But there's no leadership on the federal front. When I asked the question of David Littleproud about this, the leadership they've provided is to make all of the visa categories available to bring the workers in, but there's no one existing willing to bring those state ministers together to get them to work on a problem where Victoria and New South Wales are locked down and unable to bring those workers in at present. I think farmers are struggling to find friends amongst the politicians in their state governments when it comes to getting workers in for their farm. Apparently, there's somewhere in the region before the pandemic that half of all farm labour was required from overseas. We have Victoria and New South Wales presently locked down and unable to get any workers into that state because of that lockdown. Maybe there's exemptions being granted, but when you consider, and this is a rumour at the moment, that a 3-year-old boy can't get home to see his parents after he went to visit his grandparents in New South Wales. Queensland's saying he can't get home. We're seeking to verify that at Flow News 24. How on earth are farm labour is going to get in? I shared with you some audio just moments ago from the Northern Territory Senator Sam McMahon talking about the difficulty that a Katherine major food producer had getting workers in from Vanuatu because the state government wouldn't allow it. We saw at the Flow News 24 desk a real problem looming with the coming harvests when it came to the agricultural visa that the federal government announced, and the lack of interest from state ministers. Daniel Andrews called it a fantasy, and he's claiming, well, they've got to get the workers into Victoria somehow. Now, they stuffed around Victoria last year, and it really did cost some farmers their crops because the workers couldn't be brought in fast enough. The Agriculture Minister, David Littleproud, told us on Flow, and you can listen to that interview on the Flow News 24 podcast. He said that Daniel Andrews had something sitting on his desk to bring the workers in through Tasmania. It just hadn't been signed off yet. We started chasing the Victorian Agriculture Minister, the South Australian Minister and the New South Wales Minister about what their plans were to get workers in for their harvest, but also to work collaboratively, really important point, to work together to find some way to help Victoria and New South Wales get their farm workers in while they're under a regional lockdown. Now, the South Australian Minister played a dead bat to that in his comments to Flow News 24, said, I'm not going to play politics. Naturally, they're focused on getting workers in for South Australia's purposes. So the Federation sort of falling over a bit there. Whilst he did highlight that the Paringa in the Riverland situation they developed to bring workers in there has been described, and Minister Littleproud said in that interview with me on Flow, it is the gold standard for how states should be able to bring workers in to pick fruit and harvest produce for their farmers. The Victorian Minister was circumspect, only gave us a written statement from a spokesperson about this, saying they wanted people to work together, and said she would be calling for, this is Mary Ann Thomas, the Labor Minister there, would be calling for the states to work together. So an olive branch of sorts, even if it was only a theoretical one. But we kept chasing the New South Wales government for a response. What did Minister Adam Marshall intend to do? And we kept chasing that comment as of even yesterday, and then lo and behold, later in the day, a press release comes out saying that Minister Marshall wants to create an East Coast Agriculture Task Force, one of an alliance between Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and Tasmania, to work together to bring the workers in so that they could actually get their harvest done. Now, maybe we could take credit for pushing the buttons to make that happen. Maybe the minister was already working on it for some time and had acknowledged and seen the problem coming forward. The New South Wales farmers have popped up with their own 10-point plan for how to get the harvest done and get the workers in. Our frustration from the Flow end is we broadcast across multiple states, and our concern was exactly what has been materialising, is that states only seem focused on, like the South Australian case, on looking after their own produce, and that's understandable. Geographically, that's all that matters. But there's no leadership on the federal front. When I asked the question of David Littleproud about this, the leadership they've provided is to make all of the visa categories available to bring the workers in, but there's no one existing willing to bring those state ministers together to get them to work on a problem where Victoria and New South Wales are locked down and unable to bring those workers in at present. This is a looming crisis. I do wish Minister Marshall in New South Wales all the best in getting his East Coast Agriculture Task Force force together. I don't care who gets credit for what actually ends up happening here. What needs to happen is that we need to make sure that farmers are not left waiting for workers because their state was in lockdown and other states weren't willing to help bring the workers in. I dare say a government is going to have to come along with a checkbook, maybe the federal government, to resource this, because states get a bit salty, like Minister Marshall told a parliamentary inquiry, that they pay for the quarantine of workers and then they go elsewhere and that state benefits basically gets those workers for free. The checkbook ultimately, remember, is our taxpayer money, but maybe the feds will need to come to the party and finance this as a national quarantine requirement. In the end, the feds do have constitutional power on quarantine. Maybe they need to resource this and make it happen, because otherwise all the ministers will do was talk and talk, play politics, and crops will rot in the paddock.